Okay, yesterday we started learning the concept of Kriyas HaTorah, the Moshe Rabbeinu instituted Shabbos morning, Monday and Thursday. Ezra instituted Shabbos afternoon. We learned the amount of aliyahs goes up based on the Kedusha of the day. Okay, now the Mishnah in Megillah says that if you want to add aliyahs on Shabbos, you're allowed to add aliyahs. In other words, the minimal is 7. But before we get into that, whether you're allowed to today or not is a whole different story. But now we have what's called maftir. We have 7 aliyahs, and then we have maftir. Where does the origin of maftir come from? So I'd say just tell us there was once a decree, the guy made a decree that you're not allowed to read the Torah. So what did the Chachamim say? Okay, instead of reading Torah, we're going to take a chapter of Navi, similar to the Parsha of the week, and they're going to do that. It became what's called the Haftorah. So they couldn't do Kriyas HaTorah, so they did that. Then when the decree became nullified, so they were able to read the Torah again, so they stopped reading the Haftorah, because now you have the Chumash. Then the decree came again that they're not allowed to read Torah, so then they again instituted the Haftorah. But then, even after the decree became nullified, the Haftarah stayed. So Maftir stayed. So that's why, even though the Mishnah talks about 7 aliyahs, but nevertheless, today we have what's called Maftir, the addition of the 8th aliyah. So Yom Tov, it's 5 and 1 is 6. Shabbos is 7 and 1 is 8. Yom Kippur is 6 and 1 is 7 altogether, whatever. So now the question is like this. So why do we read again from the Chumash, the last 3 psukim approximately? Because it doesn't look right to have a Haftarah without the psukim of Chumash, because then it looks like you're equalizing the Haftarah, which is Navi, with Chumash, which is Chumash is much holier than Navi al Pi Din. Chumash goes on top of a Navi, Navi doesn't go on top of a Chumash. So Chumash is holier than Nevi'im. So therefore, before we do the Haftarah, we read a few psukim from the Parsha. Now, if it's a special Shabbos, you have a Chodesh or Chanukah or the 4 Parshiyos that we read additional, a special maftir. But that's the reason why we do it. Therefore, after the 7 aliyahs, the Chazan says, somebody says half Kaddish. When do you say half Kaddish? You say half Kaddish to separate, like we learned many times. There's different Kaddishim. There's a Kaddish, mourner's Kaddish. Okay, then you have a Yisrael Kaddish when you learn oral Torah. But then you have, in davening many times, you have half Kaddish. Chatzi Kaddish is basically a separation between one section and another section. All the times when you have a half Kaddish is to separate, for instance, to separate between Psuka de Zimra from Baruch Shem to Yishtabach and Birchas Krishma, so we say half Kaddish with Baruch Hu. By Kriyas HaTorah, so because you have the 7 aliyahs are from Moshe Rabbeinu, so to speak, biblical, and Maftir is additional, so therefore to separate between the obligatory aliyahs of 7 and the additional aliyah, so then we do Kaddish. Kaddish is generally speaking between the mandatory aliyahs and the additional aliyahs. Because again, Chatzi Kaddish is to separate between one part and another part. So therefore you have like this. What happens if there's 3 Sefer Torahs? Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Parshas HaChodesh, it could be sometimes you have Simchas Torah, you have 3 Sefer Torahs. So Kaddish at a Shabbos is always said after the 7 aliyahs. So let's say you have 3 Sefer Torahs. So usually what you do is you read in the first Sefer from Shishi, and then Shishi you read to the end, okay? And then the second Sefer Torah you read the 7th aliyah, and then you have the 3rd Sefer Torah for Maftir. So then when would you say Kaddish? You wouldn't say Kaddish between the first Sefer and the second Sefer, because you're still part of the mandatory 7 aliyahs. So when would you say half Kaddish? You would say half Kaddish between the second Sefer Torah and the third Sefer Torah, which is the mandatory aliyahs versus the optional aliyahs, the additional aliyahs. What
about the Yosef? Sometimes you have more than...
Okay, so now let's talk about adding aliyahs. So the Mishnah Megillah says that Shabbos you're allowed to add. So machlekes in poskim if you're allowed to add on Yom Tif. The minig is there's two opinions in halacha. The minig halacha paskins Yom Tif you don't add aliyahs, but Shabbos halachically you're allowed to add aliyahs. That's what the Mishnah. It's a Mishnah, but in Chabad we don't add aliyahs at all. We're very strict not to add aliyahs. Why? The Tzemach Tzedek writes in the Tshuva that the Gemara says you can add aliyahs is in the time of the Gemara when there wasn't the Balkarei with people calling up to aliyahs. In other words, originally, how did it work Kriyas HaTorah? There wasn't what's called the Balkarei, the guy that reads the Torah. You called up somebody to aliyah, he read it. They know how to read from the Sefer Torah, right? People were very educated in those days. They know how to read from the Sefer Torah. So when you called up Kohen, he read the first aliyah. You called up Levi, the Levi read the second aliyah. Shlishi, Revi'ah, Chamishi, all the way down. So then the Mishnah says you can add aliyahs because every person is making their own bracha on what they're reading. Today we don't have that. Today, because people are not able to do it, so even if people are able to do it, you don't let them do it because then you're embarrassing the people that don't know how to do it. So it's across the board, the guy reads the Torah and nobody else reads their own aliyah. So over there the Tzemach Tzedek says, because there's one person reading, so then the law of adding aliyahs doesn't apply. So in other words, because the truth of the matter, let's get back to the Kriyas HaTorah thing. When you get called up to an aliyah, you're really supposed to be the one saying it out loud. But we can't, but the guy that lays the Torah, the Balkarei does it. But halachically, you're supposed to read along quietly with the Balkarei, because you're really supposed to be reading it. Okay? But if you can't, or you could, but regardless, when the Balkarei is reading the Chumash, you're supposed to read it quietly. When you get an aliyah, you're supposed to read it quietly with him. Because you can't have loud, because then people get distracted. But you're supposed to be reading along with the Balkarei. If somebody can't read, then they just follow. That's many times why they have the pointer, the yad, so people should be able to follow it, especially if they can't read it. Huh?
Hear something that's like you're reading it?
Shemer Ka'ena, yeah, but that doesn't apply. You can't say Shemer Ka'ena, I'll listen to all brachos and not do anything. You have to do... What? That's not supposed to be done. The guy that makes a bracha is supposed to read the Haftarah. Because again, he's making a bracha on the Haftarah. So they do it in certain places, but in the halacha it's only b'diavad. The guy that gets maftir makes the brachas on the Haftarah, and he should say the Haftarah. That's part of the maftir. Is to say the Haftarah. The only reason you read in the Chumash that we just mentioned was because you don't want to give more importance to Navi than to Chumash. So you have to read the Chumash to show Chumash is still more important. But ideally, the one that gets mafta should be the one, and if you know they're not going to be able to read it, you don't give them mafta. What? I understand. That's the way it's supposed to be done. But what happens if a guy says, I want mafta, but I can't do the Haftorah? It's not proper. You don't do that. So, So that's what you do. In fact, according to halacha, even a cotton, the kid under bar mitzvah can have mafter. Shulchan Aruch it says, Pasha Zachar, he shouldn't. But Vaad Rabbonim even those weeks. Well, obviously you don't want a 2-year-old kid reading Haftorah. Yeah, but in our circles it's usually not done, but l'chatchila, according to halacha, cotton can get mafter because it's not one of the 7 mandatory obligatory aliyahs. It's additional. What?
Even just for mitzvah is not supposed to suffer, right?
Why?
Isn't there like some discussion about that?
No. The only discussion what you're talking about has nothing to do with this. Can a bar mitzvah kid read Parsha Zohar as maftir? Because he might not be a gadol yet. Parsha Zohar is min haTorah, right? So if the kids, let's see, his bar mitzvah Parsha is Parsha Zohar, right? So now the question is he taka bar mitzvah? Does he have shnei sairis? Did he reach puberty in halacha, that he's actually halachically a gadol? It's like this, you rely on the chazaka, that we assume that, that he's a gadol. But so there are poskim that want to say, another poskim say it's not true. If he has a chazaka, then it's a chazaka, and he can even read Parsha Zohar. In many places, they don't let anybody under 18 read Parsha Zohar. Because then for sure, I'll be done by Edis. At 18, for sure he's an adult. But that's the cheshbon. So again, even though halacha says you could add aliyas, but again we don't. In fact, there's another interesting opinion. According to our opinion, that says the Levush holds, for instance, that if you have, let's say, 2 parshias. Let's leave out Baruch case. Matis Masei. Okay, so Matis Masei, whatever they are. So Matis Masei. So what do? The minig is you do the V to connect both parshias, right? Revi reads from Shvi or there until Sheni in the next parsha. But there's a Levush that holds that if, let's say, you want to add aliyas. So you want to add aliyas, you finish one guy at the end of Matis, and now the next guy you start from Masei. So the Taz says you shouldn't do that. The Revi should connect both parshias. They're right, but we don't add aliyas anyway, so by us it's totally irrelevant. But poskim hold that if you need to b'shas hachak, you can do it. But again, the Taz holds l'chatchila you should connect both parshias with one aliyah. And the Rebbe used to speak about that always. That shows that it's really both parshias are one parsha, because you don't separate. 3 aliyahs in one and 4 aliyahs in the other. The Revi connects both parshias together. Okay. What?
But you do Hagba in between? I mean...
When you have 2 Sefer Torahs?
If you're saying 2 Sefer Torahs, but you keep it part of the same aliyah.
No.
Logistics.
No. You have, let's say, when you have 2 Sefer Torahs, you have 7 aliyahs in one.
Yeah.
Then you do half Kaddish, and then you do Hagba, and then you have the 8th.
I thought you were saying, though, that you're trying to make Revi'i from both.
No, that's only when you have 2 Sedras together.
I see.
Not 2 Sefer Torahs.
Sorry.
When you have 2 Parshias together, then you join them with Revi, because then they become actually one Parsha. It just is better that way. Okay, the curses you can't. Okay, now any aliyah, now the Gemara says like this, the minimal size of a kriya, even Monday and Thursday, is 10 psukim. Minimal size of an aliyah is 3 psukim. Nevertheless, you need 10 psukim for a minimal aliyah. So the Gemara asks, there's only one kriya in the year like that. So the Gemara asks, put in the morning is only 9 psukim. Vayovei Amalek until the end of Pasha is only 9 psukim. So the Gemara answers, because it's an Inyan Shalim, it's a full thing by itself. So even though there's only 9 psukim, but a normal Kriyas Torah, the minimal size of an aliyah is 3 psukim. And also, even when you do add aliyahs, you stop in the middle, you have to know where you could stop. It's not so simple. You can't just stop wherever you want. You have to make sure there's 3 psukim before, 3 psukim after, and you can't stop in the middle of a thing. You have to know where you could stop. It's not so simple. Whoever does it has to know when they're allowed to stop. What?
We need 6 people that didn't hear Kriya to make it Kriya.
No, we didn't get there yet. Yeah, but...
Right. So let's say one of them heard 8 psukim from the previous meeting. Then they use Kriya, they could be one of the 6 from the next Kriya.
But it could be one of the 6, but the Chatchil is better. We didn't get there yet. It's a lot of dinim. Some poskim might be shas chak. You could if you really need to, but we try not to. Machat shin is no mazim ma'amach be'vamayim kim shvala gal teiro.